Hello, here you're listening to Radio on Berlin, and this is the historic series, an ongoing series about historic locations in Berlin. I'm standing here with Adrian Shephard, who is recording everything and who afterwards will edit it to smooth your ears while listening. Jason Honea is facing me, and I'm Rinus Van Alebeek. Very short introduction. We are here in the Lustgarten. If you don't know what the Lustgarten is, it's the place where everybody goes to because it's the oldest place, or one of the oldest places in Berlin. And here is, in every cardinal direction, you see history. And even if you look up to the sky, you must think this is history as well, although it will be history of recent times, because it's the Himmel über Berlin. It's the sky over Berlin, the famous Wim Wenders movie. And it's also what you're breathing here is Berliner Luft. And that's one of the great songs of the 20s by Paul Linke, who is also a site on the Maybach-Ufer Canal. Anyway, we are doing very small parts right now, and we will come back for a bigger part on the Lustgarten, because here is where you can look straight through history. Jason, you're pointing out one or two things, or maybe three things on this square.
Yeah, but it's basically two things specifically I wanted to focus on. The first thing, I guess, would be the Schlossbrücke over here to our right. And then secondly, I want to talk about this big, huge granite bowl parked over here in front of the old museum, das Alte Museum. Okay? Yeah. Now, what's significant about both of them is that two of these big, huge fundamental pieces were designed by Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Carl Friedrich Schinkel was, in my opinion, the primary guy out of four guys who really transformed Berlin and made it pretty. Okay? Now, let's talk about the Palace Bridge first. The Palace Bridge was built between 1823 and 1824. Again, designed by Carl Friedrich Schinkel. And this essentially replaced what used to be called the Hundebrücke, the dog bridge, which by no means was rickety, but it was just sort of this robust, coarse-looking wooden bridge that spanned the Spree here from the Museums Island to the Unter den Linden. I don't really know when that thing was built, but probably goes back to at least the 17th century, if not the 16th century. And it was called the Dog Bridge because the hoity-toities, the royals, together with their vassals and whoever, their adjutants and grand lords, etc., would meet here at the palace and then take off down the Unter den Linden towards the Tiergarten, where after a wild party, they would just basically go and blow away animals. Okay, now, dog bridge, because all of these men on horseback were accompanied by packs of hunting dogs, and that's how this bridge got its name. Now, I cannot remember which Prussian king it was. It might have been Frederick III, decided that the dog bridge didn't really complement the palace. So he decided he needed something slightly more majestic. So, guess who got the contract to come up with the design for the dog bridge? The same guy who designed this Alte Museum, the same guy who was responsible for these hoity-toity lanterns over here, the same guy who was responsible for the Friedrichswerdersche Kirche, the guy whose single tower over there represents part of what used to be his Bau Academy. I'm going to say it again, Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Built between 1823 and 1824, there are 8 statues, 4 on each side of the bridge, depicting either Athena or Nike, escorting young men into battle or training them for battle. Crazy story about this thing. Friedrich Wilhelm IV, who would later be the crown prince, Friedrich Wilhelm, who later would become the Prussian king, Friedrich Wilhelm IV, married Katharina or something or whatever from von Bayern. Okay? And the royal house basically got 300 young men to basically help celebrate this wedding by escorting the couple over the bridge, holding Fackeln, torches. Okay. If that wasn't enough, the city of Berlin decided that they wanted to invite all of Berlin to come to the celebration and built what we could only describe as wooden bleachers on both sides of the bridge so that people could come and sit and watch the whole thing. And it was on November 29th of 1823, during this marriage procession, as they were crossing over the bridge, one of these wooden things collapsed 22 people fell into the spray and drowned. Glug, 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 glug. Okay? The Queen, who was sick that day and could not attend, was not supposed to find out about this. So it wasn't reported in the papers or anything like that. I mean, of course she found out about it. Yeah? But yeah, right over here, the Schlossbrücke. Now, let's focus over here on der große Schüssel here, this big, huge granite bowl, just at the bottom of the steps in front of the old museum, das Alte Museum. As I mentioned earlier, das Alte Museum, designed by Karl Friedrich Schinkel. It is built distinctly in a Greek style and not a Roman style. Okay, I'm pointing this out because oftentimes people don't know their columns, they just see those columns, and they see those eagles along the top, okay, which immediately make people think of Rome, all right? Because Berlin was occupied by Napoleon Bonaparte and the Grand Army, yeah, who borrowed heavily from Roman iconography in terms of decorations, banners, flags, this, that, and the other thing, okay, that was triggering for the Berliners. It was martial law for like 2 years, 3 years. Executions, crazy laws, curfews, things like that. So he built distinctly in a Greek style, not in a Roman style, because he did not want to trigger the Berliners, all right? Now, that big bowl, the king actually wanted a larger bowl, okay? And they built a larger bowl, which was supposed to fit into the rotunda in this thing, okay? But when it was built, when construction began in 1825, one of the things they got up very, very quickly were those columns, okay? The bowl came later. The Schüssel came later. Schüssel means bowl, this big, huge granite bowl in front, okay? And they determined that the bowl was too big for the rotunda, so they tried to make it smaller. They made another one, or they hacked down the larger one and created this one. It was still too big. Those columns are already up. They tried flipping it on its side, tried rolling it in sideways and stuff like that, but they realized, ain't no way in the world we're gonna get it in there. So they said, well, what are we gonna do? So they said, well, let's just park it out front, okay? If you see pictures of it depicted in old paintings from like the early part of the 19th century, that thing was so polished, it was almost like a mirror. And you can see Prussian officers standing around it, adjusting their shakos and their epaulettes and twiddling their mustaches, looking into this thing. There's quite a few paintings of that, okay? Now, during the course of the Second World War, in order to protect it, okay, what the Nazis did, or what the National Socialists did, the city of Berlin did, is they tried to hide it over here on the side of the church. Still though, however, during the Battle of Berlin, the air war over Berlin, which is also called the Battle of Berlin, it did sustain some damage. And if you get up close to it, you'll notice even it's pocked by bullet impressions and things like that. So hiding it over here on the side of the church did not actually protect it. Now, it could be a rumor, but on 2 different tours I did way back in the day, I heard this. I went online trying to ascertain this, if this was actually the fact. After the war, the Red Army wanted to take it back to Moscow as a war trophy, okay? Oh, and apparently they came and they lifted it up with a big, huge crane, and the cable snapped and the thing fell and dropped, and it cracked in half. Now, if we were to walk up close to it over here on the right-hand side, you can actually see a big, huge fissure on the side of the bowl, and you can see it's been glued or cemented back together, okay? I'm still trying to find out whether or not it's fact. Like I said, I've heard it on 2 different tours. I did hear that it was damaged during the war, but they didn't really get into more detail than that. Yeah. The Lustgarten.
Yeah. The Lustgarten. Mm-hmm. But we are going to do a second part because there's so many things to tell. If you look around, it's one side, the southern side is the rebuilt old Schloss that Jason already mentioned. Then going with the clock, there's a pink building where the military used to store their weaponry, and there was a kind of arsenal. And then turning again to the west side, there's the big museum built by Schinkel that Jason also
Karl
mentioned.
Schinkel.
And then going to the east is the big Berliner Dome. So these are the 4 pillars on which society rested, which was the crown, the military, the culture, and the church. And this is what makes this Lustgarten also a very important place in Berlin history. But there's so much more. So there's so much more.
Yeah, we've got everything behind this Auto Museum as well too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you can look at the paintings by Karl Friedrich Schinkel.
And Caspar David Friedrich.
Yeah,
as well,
they're both in the same
everybody.
room because they're related in their style.
Yeah.
But
There's
anyway,
colonnade over here as well too, behind this Auto Museum in front of the Nationalgalerie. This is also from Schinkel. Yeah.
Yeah, and the church that you don't see is also by Schinkel because it was torn down.
The one that the cathedral replaced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the end of a very short introduction to a larger part on the Lustgarten, which will follow soon and which we will record soon. You heard Jason Honea telling this wonderful stories about the bridge and the bowl, the bridge and the bowl, and the Beauty and the Beast and the bridge and the bowl. Adrian recorded it, of course, and edited it. And if you want to subscribe, you will see also on the page that you landed on, the Podbean page, that there's a possibility to subscribe to our podcast series. My name is Rinus Van Alebeek. Thanks for listening, and see and hear you soon. Bye-bye.
And my name's Jason Honea. I am the shitty listener, aka Boy True, and you're listening to Radio on Berlin. And stay tuned for part 2.
You have been listening to Radio on Berlin.
Yeah!